Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I am Rebecca Hinden, and I am the director of the Day School Initiative of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to take a few moments just before we begin, first to acknowledge our generous donor who has, in their foresight, been able to grant us a mental health grant for our Greater Metro West, our 4 Greater Metro West day schools. And through this grant, we are able to run remarkable programming like the program that you're about to see this evening, as well as other programs. And so we urge you to stay in touch with us and to join us. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge our Jewish Day School teachers and administrators who are on the call this evening. They are heroes this year for us, for our community, for our children, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge their presence tonight. I hope that you, all of you who I see, who are teachers who are joining us, who are administrators who are joining us, benefit from tonight's session. And we thank you so much for coming, as well as those of you who are parents in our community and those of you who are not parents in our day school community. I just want to take a moment to share that if you are not a Jewish day school parent, we have lots of grants available for families through our day school initiative. And so I would urge you to be in touch with me or Justin Rosen-Smolin, who will give us a wave, or Jerry Russo, who will give us a wave. Any of us are able to help you navigate what would be available through our federation for you to start attending one of our fabulous Jewish day schools. So I'm going to turn it over right now to my colleague, Justin Rosen-Smolin, who will take it from there. Thank you so much.
Good evening, and welcome to Building Your Child's Confidence and Your Own Along the Way with psychologist, parenting expert, and social media influencer, Dr. Becky Kennedy. As parents, teachers, and other caring adults involved in the lives of young people, we strive to instill a healthy sense of confidence, self-image, and resilience in children. And no doubt, we have all encountered challenges in putting this goal into practice. I am thrilled Dr. Becky has joined us to share her wisdom on this topic from her work with parents, educators, and children. I think you will enjoy hearing from Dr. Becky tonight. Be sure to check her out on Instagram and tune into her brand new podcast. We'll put some links in the chat towards the end of the program. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a little Zoom housekeeping. Today's Zoom is being recorded for archival purposes only. You all have been muted to minimize ambient noise. Dr. Becky will answer participant questions following her talk. Please use the chat feature to ask your questions, and I will share them with Dr. Becky, who will answer as many as possible. If you wish to ask a question privately, you can Zoom chat it to me directly at Justin Rosen-Smolin, and I will include among the questions I ask Dr. Becky. One invitation. We are grateful for this opportunity to gather and learn together as a community, and we appreciate the time you've taken at the end of a long week to be here. If you feel comfortable, we encourage you to turn on your camera so we can more fully experience being together in this virtual space. Thank you for your presence. And finally, a bit about Dr. Becky as she gets started. Dr. Becky is a clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety, resilience, and parenting. She specializes in thinking deeply about what's happening for kids and translating these ideas into simple, actionable strategies. Dr. Becky received a BA in psychology and human development, Phi Beta Kappa and summa cum laude from Duke University, a PhD in clinical psychology from Columbia University. Dr. Becky maintains a private practice in Midtown Manhattan, running parenting workshops and groups, lectures on various mental health issues, and consults for organizations. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Becky.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. So I'm really excited. I'm going to kind of jump right in. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss. And the thing that wasn't in my bio, and I think is really important, is that I'm also a mom of 3. So I have a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And I want you all to know that, to know like very much in the trenches myself, but also just to keep in mind as we're talking that you're all very much going to be hearing from Dr. Becky, who is not the mother of my kids. Like, my kids have Becky as their mom, who does some of this stuff some percentage of the time, who yells at her kids, who does plenty of things that are like, oh, I can't believe I just said that. And so I often read my own Instagram thinking like, oh, I should do more. I should do more of that with my kids. That sounds like that would be really good for them. So if that's your experience here or on the Instagram page, like, please know that my main goal is to talk about things in a way that leaves you at the end thinking of like one new thought, or even just something to consider, or something that you're thinking, oh, I'm going to try that for a day or for a week and just collect data and see how that goes. That none of this is right. None of this is better. And I'm just kind of so excited to be able to think through things with a group of thoughtful adults like yourselves. So with that in mind, let's talk about confidence, right? So we can start the slideshow and jump in here. Great, we can just go to the next one. So I'm really excited to talk about confidence because I feel like confidence is often thought of as like feeling good. Like that's how I don't know if that's an actual definition somewhere, but I think when most of us think about kids who are confident, like those are just kids who feel good about themselves. And then you have a kid who seems shy or hesitant, or it's like, oh, the other kids are reading, more advanced books than me, or my friend made the soccer team and I didn't. And there's a way in which we feel like that's not confident. And as a parent, I think we're like, oh, I want my kid to be confident. That's so important. And so I want to start out by shifting, I think, this definition of confidence and to share with you how I get to my definition of confidence. So, right. So self-confidence, right, is this kind of feeling of trust in our abilities, right? And you're kind of in your judgment, in your qualities. And that word trust will keep coming up. And I think it's going to be key to something to hold on to. It's really an internal state, right? That's another thing that will come up again, internal. And I'll talk about more what that really means. Self-esteem, just to kind of define it, is a little bit different. Self-esteem is like kind of more of like the stability of your belief about your own self-worth. Certainly comes from confidence, but is almost like a larger concept. And then confidence without the self-confidence. I always go back to my statistics class at Columbia classes. I had to get through a bunch of those classes in my PhD program, where I remember learning about a confidence interval. And this is actually what really got me started thinking about self-confidence in a slightly different way, where a confidence interval in a study is the degree of certainty you have about the truth of your results. So I might, say that kids who, do a certain activity end up, feeling happier. And then after I get my results, I'd say, oh, I have a 95% confidence interval. That means I'm 95% certain that those results actually are true. And I love that idea of the state of feeling certain about the truth of something. And so if we move on in the slides, to me, that's like really core to how I then think about self-confidence. Because if confidence is the state of feeling certain about something, then we can move on to the next slide. Then self-confidence is kind of the state of feeling certain about the truth of yourself. And that might sound nebulous, so stay with me. But like, what is the truth of ourselves? To me, it's like how we're feeling in any given moment. Right. And I still remember when I was at Duke, like the smartest girl in like the class. I remember this seminar I was in. There's this girl, Raquel. She was just like smarter than the rest of us. Like she was just really smart and like always had amazing comments. And she was so thoughtful, so nice, like all good things. And I still remember this day that we were discussing something in a book in like a novel we were reading. And I had like no idea what the professor was talking about. No idea. And I was like, I don't know. Everyone else seems to kind of seem okay. And I was just like, I'll just keep listening. Maybe I'll get it. And I totally remember this girl, Raquel, raising her hand. And she just goes, I'm sorry, like I have no idea what you're talking about. And is there any way you could say that a different way? Because I'm really confused. And then like everyone in the class let out a deep breath and everyone's like, yeah, we were really confused too. We just didn't want to say anything. And when I think about confidence, that example comes up over and over for me. Raquel was confident because she trusted that she was confused. The state of certainty about the truth of yourself. The truth of herself was, I really have no idea what's going on. And confidence is honoring that feeling. And then she happened to turn that feeling into like a question, right? But confidence isn't knowing. Confidence isn't understanding. Confidence is being able to say, I trust my confusion and I trust it so much that I'm actually willing to voice it. I'm willing to do something vulnerable because I trust myself. And in order to trust ourselves when we're having somewhat vulnerable emotions, we have to believe that we're a good feeler of our feelings. We have to be filled with, yes, I really do trust my feelings, rather than, oh, I do tend to kind of always kind of not accurately assess the feelings in my body. I also have to trust my internal life, because if Raquel had looked around, the rest of us in class were going like this. We were like, yeah, okay. No, none of us had any idea what was going on. So she had to look around and also say, like, I don't trust everyone else's view. I trust my own feeling more than I trust these externalities. And the other thing that I think is so powerful is that she had to believe she was smart, even though she was confused, to be able to put her hand up and say that. You have to believe, like, I'm a good, valuable, smart person, even as I have no idea what's going on in this class, to be able to raise your hand. There's actually so much that goes on in that moment. And I started really rethinking confidence in reflecting back on this. I remember in grad school, and I was like, whatever she has, like, how do we have kids that get there? Because being able to say you don't understand something in front of other people, to me, is like one of the best ways of like really visualizing confidence. And so all that to say, that kind of got me going. It's this truth about yourself. It's an ability to recognize a feeling. It's an ability to trust your own feeling and rely on the data inside you, not necessarily on the data outside you, as what guides you most. Let's go to the next slide. Another kind of big idea that we'll end up talking about with confidence. I kind of want to introduce it here before we jump into some strategies. So I'm going to talk about what's on this slide. And this is always the point in a presentation that parents are like, oh boy, this is like a big responsibility. Like, ooh, this concept is weighty. And it is. So we'll all take a deep breath and just say, we're all doing our best. The best thing about parenting is that repair is where like so many good things are at. So keeping that in mind. One of the reasons we're so vital in our kids' lives is that we truly act as our kids' mirrors. We are constantly reflecting back to our kids who they are. And really, the version of our kids we reflect back becomes the version of themselves they take in. Kids are constantly looking at their parents, wondering, is this part of me valuable? Is this part of me lovable? Is this part good? Who am I? And based on their parents' reactions, especially when they're struggling, kids take in that version of themselves. It's one of the reasons why, right, when we say to our kids, we all say these things like, oh, you're so selfish. Why can't any of you share like your brother, whatever it is? When we reflect back that version of our kids, they take that in. It's actually almost like positively reinforcing, even though, of course, we try to have the exact opposite impact. But to me, what this also really speaks to is how important it is to see what's underneath our kids' behavior. Because underneath any difficult behavior on the surface is always a good kid. And if we think about ourselves as our kids' mirror, we have to reflect back a version of themselves they could feel good about for them to develop self-worth and self-confidence in themselves. This does not mean anything goes as a parent. I actually fashioned myself a pretty firm boundary parent. And yet there's a difference between being firm or being boundaried around certain behaviors and always trying to see the good inside your kids. And that's going to be really important as we kind of continue to speak. Okay. So now this is, I always, whenever I think about things, we can go to the next slide just to let you into my mind. I like love thinking about big ideas. And then my mind just goes, I always say this. I'm like, okay, what should I do? But what do I do? Like, how do I put that into action? I like to like kind of have things be actionable. So I want to talk about 4 things tonight. These are like the 4 categories of things that I'll break down as we talk that I believe are core for building confidence in your kids. Almost like it's hard to imagine someone being truly self-confident over the years without kind of having these 4 things. So 1, emotion talk. Talking about feelings, in my mind, I always laugh as I say, it's like 0% soft and mushy and 100% practical to developing confident, assertive kids. Like feelings are just vital. focusing on what's inside of our kid rather than what's outside of our kid. And I have like some great kind of concrete strategies for what that really means and how to do that. And to me, this has been something that's been so powerful in my own home. Promoting a growth mindset. So we'll talk about growth mindset and really how to put that into action in your home. And then this is an idea I always come back to, which is this idea of like, how can I reflect back the most generous interpretation of my kids' behaviors so I can reflect back their best selves, not their worst selves. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about the first one, emotion talk. 3 kind of categories of things I want to talk about here: labeling feelings, asking about feelings, and connecting confidence directly with feelings. We feel before we think. That is so important. If you're like me, you love your brain, you love your thoughts, you love your logic. It's so linear. It is so organizing, right? It's so logical. Feelings are not illogical. They're just not logical. It's like kind of someone saying Spanish is ill Mandarin. It's just not Mandarin. It's not an inferior language. They're just totally different languages. And that's really important to consider about feelings and thoughts. They're just 2 different languages, right? And we feel before we think. As animals, we sense, we react. Our thoughts kind of make some sense and try to figure those things out. And our thoughts, don't get me wrong, are hugely important. But our feelings come first. And I always feel like our feelings, they just like don't get the respect they deserve. I think they don't get the respect they deserve because they're actually so overpowering that so many of us felt so overwhelmed by them and never got the help we would need to kind of harness our feelings. And then one of the ways we kind of manage that is discounting their importance because actually they're so powerful. Kids who develop really lasting self-confidence are kids who are able to recognize and talk about their feelings. That's what exists inside of our bodies. And if you're not learning to pay attention to what's in here, which a large part of that is our feelings, then it's very, very difficult to be able to trust your feelings, which means it's really impossible to be confident. So to kind of go over some categories, labeling feelings just as a habit in the family or in the classroom is hugely important in kids developing confidence, because when we're willing to name a feeling and see it, our kids learn that it's okay to name a feeling and see it. And the wider range of feelings kids learn to be at home with, not behaviors, feelings, the wider range of feelings they can be confident in when they're an adult. I don't know any adult who has a problem feeling confident when everything's going their way. Like, I think that's like pretty easy. But finding confidence when you've gotten fired from a job, being like, okay, I'm gonna do something different, or finding confidence the next time you take a math test when you struggled in the first one. That I think is something that we know differentiates people, whether just you go into an abyss or you realize that there's something of worth in you. And so the wider range of feelings we're willing to connect with in our kids, we're literally widening the range of feelings they can be confident in. Your kid doesn't make the soccer team, right? Avoiding that feeling or trying to think our way out of a feeling, be like, there's always next year, or hey, you made the basketball team. But then if I go back to confidence doesn't mean feeling good. Confidence means being able to trust your feelings. I might say, I know you really wanted to make the team. That's really disappointing. I get that. It's so odd. Like, that's confidence building, 100%. That is so confidence building because a kid learns, oh, I do know this disappointment. I thought I was disappointed. So I guess I am a good feeler of my feelings. And my parents are basically explicitly giving me permission to feel this because they're not talking my way out of it. They're not trying to convince me. They don't seem to be so scared of this feeling because they're willing to just name it. So I don't have to be so scared of this feeling. Right? Here's another example, right? Oh, your brother just got a lot of birthday presents, a lot of new Legos. Oh, it's so hard to be a sibling on a birthday. I feel really jealous that he got all those gifts. I get that. I see why you would feel that way. Confidence building. A kid learns it's okay to feel jealous. This is something I will feel throughout my life. And when I do, I'm prepared. I can trust this feeling. Asking about feelings, right? Now, one of the things about asking about feelings that I always need to remind parents, my kids often don't answer these questions. Too often we think good questions we ask to our kids are the ones that get like profound answers. I don't get anything profound from my kids basically ever, okay? Except maybe late at night, and like kind of all the deep thoughts come out. I ask questions to my kids to model for them so they can start asking questions of themselves. I want my kid to be 18 and be like, I wonder why I said that to my friend. That was pretty rude. I wonder why I did that. Not, I wonder why I did that. I'm an awful person. Like literally, like, why did I do that? What was going on for me? Kids don't ask themselves questions unless they had parents who are curious and ask them questions. We're not actually looking for answers as much as we're modeling the importance of being curious about what's happening inside you. So when I say to my kids, I wonder if there's anything frustrating that happened at school today. One of those like, oh, I really want something and I couldn't do it. Like, it's not like my kids are on the dinner table, just so you know, are like, Mom, I'm so glad you asked me that. Well, actually, this really interesting, frustrating thing happened at math. Like, that's never happened. Usually my kids will be like, I don't know, or, maybe they'll say something. And that's a great opportunity for me or my partner to almost model, oh, I had something really frustrating happen. Yeah, I really, really did. And so we're kind of modeling this asking and sharing more than we're expecting our kids to produce. What do I mean connecting confidence with emotion talk? If I can think of one line that everyone here starts saying to their kids after this presentation, it's right here. And it seems so weird, but to me, there's nothing more confidence building than telling a kid, you really know you feel that way, right? So a kid is really upset they weren't invited to some group play date, and you're initially thinking, oh, it's so silly. It's like a second grade issue, but you kind of take a breath and you're saying, oh, you're really disappointed. You really know you feel that way. Oh, you really wish you could stay up later. You really know you feel that way. Mom, can I? No, sweetie, it is bedtime. You have school tomorrow. And one of my jobs is to make sure you go to bed at a time that actually makes sense for you. But I totally get that feels really early and that feels really annoying. And you are really, really annoyed about that. You really know you feel that way. It is truly saying to your kid, I am building your self-trust. Because when I think about, I don't know, my kid sometime dating someone, it's like, I don't know, like, hey, you want to come home with me? And let's say it's my daughter's like, I don't know about this yet. You know what I want her next thought to be when the person says, it's no big deal, just come. I know I feel this way. I know I'm not ready. I know. Versus, hey, I'm so upset I'm not invited to this party. It's not a big deal, sweetie. It's fine. I don't want my daughter, when she gets upset when she's 20 and someone talks to her, to say, I guess it's not a big deal. It's fine. Our words about our kids' feelings become their self-talk about their own feelings. And confidence comes from trusting this important information inside of ourselves. One of the big ideas I think about is we get very caught up in the content of our kids' words. Right? They say, I'm upset about the birthday party. We get very caught up in the content, like a birthday party. It's not a big deal. One of the tricks, I think, is to try to go past the content to the feeling. The feeling is disappointed. I don't know any adult in my practice who's ever said, my parents got rid of all the disappointment in my life. They just invalidated it for so long, and I've never felt disappointed as an adult. No, right? Either we're prepared to manage a feeling or we're not. So one of the skills I often think we need to build as parents is, let me see under the content. This is not really about the birthday party. Yeah, my kid is upset he didn't get a Lego set. It's not really about the Lego set. He's dealing with frustration, or she's dealing with disappointment. Those are human feelings they'll have their whole life. All right, let's move on to the next one. Another really, really important thing about talking about feelings that builds confidence. Ask more, tell less. We love giving advice. We love it. I love it too. It's like kind of what I'm doing, right? So I should, talking about myself. My best moments with my kids is when I just ask a lot of questions. Asking a ton of questions. What does this mean? Your kid comes home and their teacher is like, just so you know, Tyler hit someone at recess. What we want to tell. You know not to hit people in this family. What can you, the next time you do that, the next time you get upset, just go tell your teacher. Telling versus, I wonder what happened on the playground. Something must have happened to make you really upset. Now, one of the things we're going to work on is doing a bunch of things instead of hitting, but we can talk about that later. Something must have happened. Huh. Even, oh, you felt angry because he said you couldn't run around with him. Huh. I wonder what else can we do when we feel angry? What else can we do when we feel angry versus next time you're angry, tell the teacher? Vastly different, right? Another way of kind of asking, right? I remember when my son came home one day and he told me, I created a club, and I decide who's in and who's out, right? What did I want to say to him? That's really not nice, sweetie. Like, something that's really not nice. How would you feel if people created a club? And then I remembered, like, ask, don't tell. I asked him a million questions. It was like one of the best car rides. What does it feel like to have that power? Because we're not talking about a club. We're talking about what it feels like to be able to wield power. That is a hugely important thing to explore with your kids. What's it like to be the decision maker? Ooh, how did you get to be in that position? Ooh, what was it like to think about the kids who'd be in the club and out of the club? Do the kids out of the club know that they're not in the club? And then maybe I wonder what that would be like if you weren't in the club. Oh, that's so tricky. That would feel so bad. Seems like having that power would feel so good. This is really important. I'm so glad we're talking about this. What else happened? And all of a sudden, we've opened something up instead of shut it down. Ask instead of tell. All right, let's move on to kind of the next category. It's the next slide. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. I think it's really interesting, is this idea of who we are on the inside versus what we do on the outside. This to me is like another thing that just, again, I'm like training myself as a parent. Like, we are a family. It's like a family value, I say in my kids' lot. We're a family who cares most about what's inside people, not what's outside people. Beyond, I think that's just like a nice sentiment. I also think it helps kids become good people because they look inside themselves, they build that confidence, they learn how to regulate their emotions. It kind of all works in addition to kind of being more feel good. So what does that mean? We can go to the next slide. So the first time I said that to my kids, I remember that, like, I don't even know what that means. And I was like, sometimes the best thing to do is we can just create a list, like what's in inside stuff and what's inside stuff and what's outside stuff. And again, my kids are like, what are you talking about? So I'll say something like this. Well, like at school, an outside thing is like what grade you get on a test. An inside thing would be like how much time you put into studying. What else is an inside thing and an outside thing? An outside thing would be getting into the honor society. An outside thing would be like kids calling you so smart. An inside thing is your willingness to try a math problem that's really challenging. Your desire to learn new things. Your editing over and over. Right? And in general, right? Inside stuff is stuff in you that you kind of have control over. And outside things are accolades and certain achievements that we truly don't have control over. And I think we know as we get older, we have less and less control over, right? And if that's how we're building our self-worth, it's an endless treadmill. It just never sticks because it doesn't live inside you. You can't build lasting self-esteem outside in. And starting this with kids early, and especially with kids who are highly accomplished. There's no group of kids who's at risk for low self-esteem than kids who are extremely talented and get a lot of accolades and awards and praise when they're younger. Because it's so easy to rely on what's outside of them to build them up that they don't have to look in. And it's so easy as a parent to reinforce that. My oldest son is kind of like that. He did so many things early. He read so early. He was doing math stuff so early. He loves sports, right? And I remember being like, he's my kid I'm like the most nervous about. Like, he actually is, because he doesn't have to look in to try to feel good. So what does that mean? I remember this night that he was going to a baseball game the next day. And I was talking about this inside outside stuff. And I ended up saying to him something like, about his hitting, like, your hitting's going to go how it goes. And look, we're a family. We value the inside stuff more than the outside stuff. One of the things I'm going to really notice is I know you've been working on hustling to first base, even if you think you're going to get thrown out. I'm going to really look for that. I know you've been really working on that. And I know you've been really working on being more patient with your teammates if they drop a fly ball. It's so frustrating, I know. And then I said to him, I was like, if you end up hitting a hit that feels really good, of course I'm going to cheer for you. That's not the stuff that we like really care about in our family. So the day when he had like a home run, I remember this. You know, of course I like participate in the cheering. I'm not going to like be neutral. The next week, he's going to bed and he looks at me and he just goes, Mom, I mean, you don't really care. Like if I don't hit a home run tomorrow, like you don't care, right? Like you would cheer, but like you don't really care. I could cry thinking about the way he wanted to know so desperately that that's not what I saw. And I said to him, I said, no, sweetie. I mean, of course, that's always fun. And of course I'll cheer, but that's not the thing we really care about. How else does this come up? I think appearance is one, whether we're focusing on pretty and so cute and skinny, or caring heart, energetic spirit, even around clothes, the difference between you look so cute versus so interesting. How do you think to put that outfit together? Tell me more. The second is very inside question. You're looking inside of a kid versus outside. Comes up in sports for sure. How many baskets did you score versus what's your attitude when you win? What's your attitude when you lose? And just making sure these kind of inside values are things that you actually talk about, because our kids pick up what we value by what we give our attention to, by what we say to them, by what we say about them to our partner, to other friends. They hear we're saying, oh, did you see he had the most baskets on anyone on his team? Versus, oh, you know what I noticed today? Even when he was on the bench, he was really cheering for his teammates. Wasn't that so amazing to see? Again, it doesn't mean we shouldn't cheer for our kids when they score a basket. It's just about some type of balance. Kids can't feel confident about themselves if they learn that who they are is what they do. It is so much pressure, and it comes at the expense of building what I consider their interiority, who they are inside. All right, let's move on to the next one. It's a really nice extension to growth mindset. I'm not sure how much the school, you've read about growth mindset. Carol Dweck's kind of book, Mindset, goes over all this. But growth mindset to me is kind of an extension of kind of what's inside of us versus what's outside. And growth mindset would really posit that frustration and setbacks and failures are on the pathway to success, not an enemy of success. That is so, so important. I think we all know as adults, it's not about getting to the point where you struggle. Everyone does that. The struggle isn't the problem. It's how long you're able to stay in the struggle that's predictor of success. Not struggling to the point of obviously, feeling like completely depleted, but struggling in that this is challenging, right? And one thing I think a lot about, even when kids get to kindergarten, is for some of those kids, learning to read is truly the first thing they've ever had to face where they've had to really manage struggling. That really things are made easy for them. They never really have to be frustrated for too long. And then they start reading, they're like, this is really hard. How used to frustration and difficulty and delayed gratification is by the time a kid is 5 and 6 years old has a massive impact on their reading. I'm not saying phonics and other issues don't too, of course, but that's hugely, hugely important. And people who endorse a growth mindset have much higher levels of self-esteem, that we can struggle, that we can work on things, that there's no fixed certain ability. So how do we do this in our home? Can move on. Talking about process over product. And this is kind of easy to remember because I always think this is also like an inside thing versus an outside thing. And we can move on to the next slide, right? So a lot more of, I can see how much effort you put on that assignment. I really see that. You went back after dinner and kept editing it versus, oh, you got an A, great job. It's really building that idea of work versus ending. One of the things I think that we can do so much more often around this is talk about our own struggles and also really model struggling in this way. I always think that our kids are kind of bombarded by our competence. Like if you think about everything that they have to do before they even walk out the door, getting dressed, brushing their teeth, depending on their age, putting on their clothes, pouring milk, like tying their shoes. Like these are things we don't even think for a second about. And they see that every second of the day. And they struggle with a lot of those things. Like just imagine the first hour of your world being in a house where someone could do every single thing with ease that you couldn't do. It's almost amazing to me. Kids don't just have massive tantrums like every single second of the day. That's so frustrating. So one of the things I really do try to do is be in that struggle to model this type of growth mindset. Like, I'll put my shirt on backwards one day and come out, I'll have my kid catch me, Mom, your shirt's on backwards. Oh, that happens sometimes when you put on clothes, right? If you have a kid who struggles to do that, it's because it's hard. And the gap between us and our kids makes learning so frustrating, so intimidating, right? Or when you're cooking, I'll try to, I burned the garlic. Oh, I feel like I need to start over. Wait. It's okay. Sometimes that happens. I think I can make this work. That is a direct correlation to your child's ability to work through a math problem when they struggle. I mean, obviously the content is different. The process is the same. There's a lot of mantras around growth mindset that I use a lot with my kids. The word yet is always talked about as growth mindset. It is so powerful, right? When kids say, oh, I don't know how to read chapter books. Yes, you don't know how to read chapter books yet. That's true. Just yet, right? And I actually think that's useful in my own life, like in your own life, when you're like, oh, I haven't figured out this thing for work yet. It just opens up. It opens up so much, right? I use this a lot with my kids. When something feels hard, it means my brain is growing. That's a really powerful idea. And I'll play around with that. And I'll even have kind of quasi competitions with my kids around growth mindset ideas. So I remember this day that my daughter came home and said, do you know how to say yellow in Spanish? And I was like, I really don't. She told me what it was. And I said this, I was like, ooh, I have 1 point. I didn't know that. My brain just grew. I didn't know that. So exciting. It's so amazing. I guess I'm beating you 1-0. I'm not really one for competition with our kids like that. But to me, when we reverse the idea that you can get like a point or win for not knowing, I feel comfortable with that type of playfulness. And I remember after doing this, my daughter was with my older son and he said something, I can't remember exactly what it was. He's like, you don't know what that word means, or something an older brother will say. And she's like, I don't, but that means I'm going to learn something new and you won't. And he was like stopped in his tracks. He's like, oh, I guess that's true. Right. So we try to really value and almost elevate learning something new. All right, next slide. These are great. You can even Google this. This I took, right? There's all these great replace this with this statements around growth mindset that are really powerful, right? So instead of, oh, this is too hard, this might take some time, right? What's fixed and what's growth? I can't do this. I can learn. I'm going to train my brain, right? Oh, my friend can do this and I can't. Oh, you know what's hard sometimes, sweetie? When you see people do things that you can't yet do. I get that. You know what's also really brave? Talking to those people. It's so great to have friends who can teach us things, right? We can learn, right? And so introducing some of these mantras, some of these ideas, again, I don't expect immediate remission and whatever we'd even get remission is, but you're just planting the seeds of this ability to grow rather than be fixed. This helps kids be confident when they struggle instead of seeing a struggle as a sign of a failure. All right, next slide, my last one, then we'll take some questions. This to me is one of the most powerful questions I ask myself at the end of the day. And I say at the end of the day because so many times my best parenting occurs when I'm willing to reflect on something that happened that I didn't feel great about. And then I hold myself to go back and repair the moment with our kids. I always feel like we have to change things 10 times in retrospect before we can access that skill in the moment, right? And so often we don't do that. And then we wonder why we're struggling. You can't access a new skill for the first time when things are heated. It's much easier to do it after and repair. And that kind of builds up that muscle. So what does this mean? What is the most generous interpretation of my child's behavior? Huge, right? Self-confidence comes from our relationship with our feelings. And if we're in situations in our family where we feel like they see the worst behavior and interpret then the worst inside of us, then we're building up kind of that bad feeling inside versus something that's good. Learning to see the good inside your child when they're struggling, to me, is one of the most important things to keep practicing as a child, as a parent. So what does this mean? You can go to the next slide. I think here's a couple examples, right? So rudeness. right? Kids can be really rude, especially now when they're angsty, right? So, hey, can you clear your plate? I'm not clearing my plate. You clear my plate. That's a nasty thing. I'm not saying that's okay. But my assumption is that a kid is struggling with something to do that. It would actually be my assumption with other adults too. I just probably have a little less tolerance, for adults as they get older than kids. So I'm thinking about saying back to my kid, you are so rude. What is wrong with you? I am reflecting back to my child that she is rude. I can't expect that when I reinforce that part of my child, it's going to get smaller. Like it just doesn't even make logical sense. We can't do that. We don't shame our kids into change by making them feel bad. Versus, wow, I do not like that tone of voice. Also, something must feel really bad for you to talk to me that way. I know I need a moment to cool off. Maybe you do too. Let's figure it out together. I label the behavior, but I see the good kid. I always think kids can just tell if their parents are looking at them like they're a bad kid doing bad things, lowering confidence, or a good kid having a hard time. I think our spouses can always tell that too, right? Are we looking at our spouse like they're a good person having a hard time or a bad person doing bad things? I think that's hugely important how we treat ourselves in our worst moments also. Do we talk to ourselves like I'm a bad person who just did a bad thing? Or like I was a good parent, a good teacher, having a hard time? Listening is another topic here, right? You never listen versus, oh, it's really hard to stop playing. I know we're going to have to get through this and get to bath, but maybe tomorrow we can brainstorm ideas to make it a little easier to stop. Maybe I could do something different. Maybe we can think about it together. I know listening is hard, especially at night, but I'm pretty sure if we put our brains together, we can come up with something better. Like I'm not being permissive. I'm seeing the goodness and I'm building my kids' long-term confidence because I'm not reinforcing that my child is a bad kid. All right, I'm going to pause for some, and I should say before we get into questions, just because I'm thinking about listening, my first podcast episode was all about listening. So if you haven't listened to it, I totally reframe listening there. It's such a common struggle. And I think give some really actionable strategies. So that just dropped. I'm excited about it. I had to plug that. Now I'm ready for some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becky. And in addition to checking out your website for your podcast and your blog and other resources, everyone is going to be getting a copy of this slide deck in a follow-up email tomorrow. So in case you missed some of Dr. Becky's snippets of wisdom. So a number of questions to ask you, and I'm sure there are going to be more. So first question, what do we do when two parents don't act as the same type of mirror? And the person asking this question means if there's one parent taking the approach of labeling, asking, connecting, and then there's another, and I've certainly been this other parent myself, reacting emotionally or intensely in the moment to your child's behavior, how do you approach that gap in reactions among parents?
Totally. So I think that this is so common, right? So I think there's a couple questions usually people have under that question. So I'm going to kind of speak to some of those too. In that I think people wonder, like, is that okay? Like, is my kid still going to be okay? Do they need two parents? Is kind of one enough? What do you do in the moments that feel bad with a parent if that parent doesn't tend to want to apologize or repair? Like, what's my role as the other parent? And I think often in that question also is, how do I talk to another parent about these differences? And is there a way to kind of bridge that gap? And I'm going to solve all of those problems right now. No, I'm not going to solve any of those problems actually, but I will give some thoughts on all of them. So, look, I think there's actually a ton of research that basically says like kids need to feel kind of understood and safe with one of their parents. I mean, obviously more is better, and the degree of lack of safety obviously can vary and be more or less significant, but it's really, really important for kids to feel in general like they have one at least secure base. I think that's always the image, right? That's what we are for our kids. And I don't know if you all know that term from attachment literature, not attachment parenting, like attachment theory, Bowlby, Ainsworth, like that's what we are. We're a secure base for our kids, and we hope that they take that in so then they can do what anyone with a secure base does, explore, because you have something to come back to, right? So I think that's point number one. Point number two, I say this to parents a lot because a lot of the parents I've seen privately, like there's one parent who's like, I don't know about everything you're saying. Like I kind of yell at my kids. Like I do with the opposite of what you say. That's how I was parented. I ended up okay. And I actually think I'm like more effective, right? Than my spouse. My kids listen to me. Right? I think there's so many nuances around that. What do we mean by effective? What are we measuring by? What's fear induced? But without that, right? I would say to those parents to their face, I say, okay, well, maybe you're going to change, maybe you're not, right? But we know that bad moments with parents where they're reactive and yelling, that is terrifying to a child. That, and going back to the idea of we feel before we think, we can't unfeel a feeling. I know that sounds obvious maybe, but I think we often think that can happen. That like, if we just don't talk about it, like somehow our kid's gonna unfeel it. Like my child was just screamed at by one parent and like, oh, it seems okay. That feeling is there. And I don't mean that in a dire way, but I actually mean it in something hopeful. As long as that feeling isn't the ending of that chapter, our kid doesn't end that way. As long as that child has one parent who at least goes and says, hey, that felt scary. Even if it's, hey, whatever that parent is, let's say that parent is a mom, right? I'll just say, hey, mom had one of those times where her big feelings came out. That actually really wasn't your fault. And this is what I would say to both parents. I say, and you have to say, and the other thing mom sometimes struggles with is she actually feels, I think, so bad that she has a really hard time saying sorry. None of that's your fault, but you should know that, right? Like giving a kid a story to understand something distressing is critical. It's critical to even trusting yourself because kids, when they're not giving a story, they have literally two things only to do. Self-blame, I'm so bad. Self-trust, that must not have been a big deal because if it was, someone would have talked to me about it. We don't want to wire our kids with self-blame and self-mistrust, self-doubt. That's just like, we don't want them to do that. And I do think if you have a spouse who you feel like, yeah, is kind of on a different page, like if that was me, I would do some type of repair, not say sorry, not excuse, but more say to my child, that felt bad. You were right to feel scared by that. I want my kid to feel scared by someone who yells at them in their face. Like, I don't want them to lose that fear response by the time they're an adult because they're like, well, I guess it's just what happens in loving relationships. So I think that's really important. Now, how do we bridge the gap? Ironically, a lot of couples will come to me and someone will be like, Dr. Becky, just convince my partner that like all the things you say are right. Just like do that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really do that, for many reasons. But ironically, right, getting on the same page is actually much less important in anything in a marriage than learning your partner's page. Like I always think like us and our partners were on like two different planets. Like sometimes we find a third planet that we're on, but I think anyone who's been married for a long time, especially with kids, you're like, yeah, we're just like a lot of ways we're on different planets. And marriages do well, or partnerships do well when you kind of consider that part of my job is to visit my partner's planet and learn his customs. Not because I'm going to adopt them, not because they're better than mine, but because there's a reason my partner developed in the way he did. And before any of us are willing to consider any type of acculturation in that model, we have to feel very respected and seen for what we're doing. So I would actually lead those conversations starting with, tell me, like all of this feeling stuff, like I know you two both want the same thing for your kids. That's so interesting. And yet you're going about it very different ways. And you must have a reason. You must have something you're worried about. You must have seen something you've seen. You must have had something in your own past. I actually let's forget changing. Just let's have a conversation. And to me as a partner to say, I'm going to have that type of conversation with my partner and hopefully then vice versa. And my only goal is to end the conversation saying, I actually understand a little bit more than I did before the conversation. It's very frustrating for A personalities. They're like, and then what? But then when does the change come? And you have to wait. You have to wait, right? And I always think Esther Perel, I don't know if you all know her. She's amazing. Her podcast is the best podcast in the world. And she has this great episode that's just called You Can Be Right or You Can Be Married. And I just think that kind of says everything. I think it's true with our kids. I think it's true with our partnerships. And we all have to I have a very hard time not being right. My husband, if he was here, would be like, yeah, she does. Right. So that's something I'm always working on in my partnership is just what she means by we could be married or right is we can either be connected to someone by visiting their planet, or we can kind of be alone and solitary in the state of being right. So I think that's kind of the thing to go with when you're trying to bridge that gap.
Thank you, Dr. Becky. Different kind of question that I think would be helpful for a number of folks. Could you describe some practices that could be used to reduce anxiety in children about things that seem beyond their control? The person who asked this question, brought up issues around climate change, abuse of animals, sexism, racism, anti-Semitism, sort of things that are, getting a lot of airtime right now in our media, and certainly issues in our world to address. When our children are taking that in, how can we sort of help them work through those emotions?
Yeah, great. So I promise I'm not here to plug on my workshops and courses, but I have to say tomorrow my workshop happens to be on anxiety and worry in kids. So I feel like it would be a kind of a miss to not name that. So I have a whole live workshop on just this. So if you have a kid who's anxious or filled with big worries, that workshop is going to be really, really powerful. And what I'll say is, to me, so much advice out there, and I think our gut instinct and how we intervene with our kids around anxiety is without a doubt some of the biggest drivers and accelerators of anxiety. That's why they don't help our kids, because they make it worse. So we often think, and even that word, I want to reduce my kids' anxiety. We don't reduce anxiety. We don't reduce our kids' anxiety. We don't reduce our anxiety. I promise my solution isn't like we just make it worse, right? But like, stay with me here, okay? We don't change our feelings. We can get really good at changing how we relate to our feelings. And when we do that, things that used to feel like a 10 can start to feel like an 8, because we change how we think about them and how we relate to them. But it actually is very different than trying to bring them down. So what would trying to reduce anxiety look like? You don't have to worry about that. You're only 8, sweetie. I'm trying to make my kid not feel that way. And then I come back to, we can't unfeel a feeling. So now what I really leave my kid with is, well, I do feel this way. And now the only thing that's happened is that I've realized I'm actually more alone than I was before in the feeling, not the content, the feeling, because my parents are trying to get me out of the feeling. So I always think about this image. When your kid's anxious, picture that they're in a hole and you're looking at the hole and you're like, you don't have to be in the hole, just like climb out, just like get out of there. I can even see how you can do it. I'm gonna take you out. That's what most of us want to do. Versus jumping into the hole, okay? Here's the interesting thing about jumping into the hole. We do two really important things once we jump in. Number one, your child feels your presence. Now all of a sudden, you're not alone. Like you're like, well, my mom's here. My dad's like right next to me. That changes everything. There's literally no more important tool in parenting than our presence. And we doubt that all the time. Number two, when you jump in, and I'll explain a little more what that means, your kid learns something so much more powerful about their anxiety. They literally learn this feeling can't be as bad and scary and overwhelming as it feels to me, because there's no way my parent was on a suicide mission in here. My parent would have never joined me in this if this actually was so awful. When we try to pull our kids out of something, what we're really saying to them is like, oh, don't feel that. No, I don't want that. Of course it adds anxiety. They're like, oh, I'm reading past the content of my parent. My parent doesn't want me to feel this feeling. My parent is avoiding this feeling. What builds anxiety? Avoidance. It's just, right. I'm far from a behaviorist, but that's just a pure behavioral principle. So what's the first thing I would tell you to tell your kid when they're like nervous or anxious about any of these things? I would say this line before anything else. I am so glad you're talking to me about this. It's so important. Pause. You are doing so much more than we think we're doing with that simple line, right? And again, imagine you're really worked up about something coming up in your job, and your partner would be like, that's so not a big deal. You'll be totally fine. And your partner is like, you don't have to be worried about that. You're making a big deal out of it. It really is fine. I don't know one adult who would be like, oh, that's so helpful. Now I don't feel anxious anymore. Like, I don't know one person who'd say that. Versus your partner's like, this is so important. Let me put down my phone. I'm just so glad I'm here with you. Like, now you're not alone. It's the aloneness in our feelings that give us the big amount of distress. It's not the feeling. So I would start there. Another line I love for kids who think like this is something like, it's really hard to be a kid with such a busy brain. I used to say that to my kid a lot because he was such a deep thinker. And again, I'm not shying away from it. I'm actually starting to show my kid, you can tolerate that. I'm here with you. So more on that in my workshop tomorrow. If you can't make it, it'll be recorded. You can get the recording, but I hope that's like a good framework to think about.
Thanks, Dr. Becky. We have time for one more question.
Sure.
What can I do to support my child who tries to hurt themselves when they're having an angry outburst?
Great. So I would think about two categories of things. What do I do in the moment, right? But then what do I do outside the moment? I think that's the part that we often miss as parents because we survive these like awful, exhausting moments. And then if you're like me, you're like, ooh, all right, like glad that's over. And then you just want to forget about it, understandably, because it was so painful for everyone. But we need two different skills. Certain skills as parents, I always think are like fire containment skills. It would be like if you had a fire in your house, you would just like want to contain the fire. But then after a fire stopped in your house, I think we all know you'd have to be like, I wonder what started the fire and I need to fireproof my house. But you don't fireproof the house during a fire. But if you don't fireproof the house, the fire, like it's just going to happen again. It's not your fault. It's just nothing's changed except you've gotten through that fire. So what's a fire? And containment is important. There's no fire extinguisher in my emotional metaphor, right? And that just doesn't work. That just inflames it. So what's a containment strategy there? Those are just the survive it, is not letting your kid hurt themselves. And I think often we don't give ourselves enough authority to intervene in a physical way, not physical hurting, physical safety producing. The term or the words, I won't let you, are so important. I won't let you hit yourself. Not, we don't hit ourselves. Stop hitting ourselves. Telling a kid to stop doing something they're doing is very dysregulating for a kid because a kid's like, is there no adult who's going to like stop me? It would be like if your kid was running into the street. You wouldn't be like, we don't run into the street, sweetie, or stop running into the street. I think if we witnessed that, we'd be like, what is that parent doing? Just like, go pick up the kid, like just do the thing, right? Our kids need that from us. It's actually a sign that they have a sturdy leader around them. So if that means holding their wrist, if that means putting their head here, your hand here so they don't bang their head against the wall. Yes, it literally means intervening. Now, that's not where things change though. That's just like, oh, okay, I got through it without making it too much worse. Outside of the moment, one of the things I'd be thinking about is what are the things that trigger my kid, right? Is it, oh, whenever math homework gets hard, whenever I say no, when my kid is with his sister and his sister is doing something that makes him jealous. And I would play around with those scenarios. So let's say it's the math homework thing, or it's learning to read. What are the things we're going to do? Is we're going to pretend to read. I know it's so silly. We're going to like pretend to read because reading is one of those things. And this happened for me too when I was a kid, that when it starts to get hard, it just feels so bad in our body. It's like our body wants to like hit our head against the wall. Oh, you're not in trouble. But same thing for me. When something's hard for me and I'm trying to work on it, I practice it. And we're going to practice this. And that's where I would literally introduce the different coping skills. So if my kid is saying I hurt myself during something, I'm not just going to give my kid a deep breath. Like I love a deep breath, but like someone who's going to hurt themselves, a deep breath just like isn't quite going to do it for them, right? So I might do hitting a pillow, or I might, do something else that's like a little more visceral that gives my kids something. And I would literally create the situation. Oh, right. And kids have kind of fun with this because it feels kind of silly to be practicing something that usually leads to like a disastrous moment. And the other thing you're doing besides actually practicing some other coping skill is you're actually changing the moment because you're generating this situation, which almost gives this preview of a feeling. But instead of that feeling immediately only converting into that awful moment when it comes, we're kind of infusing our connection, our presence. We're probably calm because we're practicing it. We're maybe being a little playful. And so when the feeling actually comes in full force, like it's actually changed because of these things that we've kind of pre-infused. It works the same way after. Like, I can't remember who said this, but I always found it amazing that therapy is really the process of changing memories. I think that's like just so interesting because when you look back on your life and you reflect on it, and you feel safe with someone and you feel like you can see new perspectives and you feel repair, you build compassion for yourself where previously had there just been self-blame, those elements actually get layered next to the memory. And so the memory in your body, like actually the weight of it changes, like it actually does. And we can do that with our kids, right? So we can also do that after the moment. right? Oh, just telling the story, right? One of the things is when we build coherence, we change moments that feel rapid and chaotic and dysregulated to things that are more understandable. That helps build regulation. So earlier today, you were doing your math. Oh, that big feeling came. And then when that big feeling came, something happened. You wanted to bang your head against the wall. And then mommy was there. And I put my hand behind you. You didn't like that. But here's the thing. Mommy will always keep you safe. My number one job is to keep you safe, even when you're yelling at me. I love you that much. I will always do that. Tomorrow we'll practice some other things. You're a good kid, having a hard time. We're going to figure this out. I've changed that experience by talking about it that way. So I think the more general idea, even if this doesn't apply to your kid, is when my kid is struggling with something, I truly need two totally different sets of skills. How do I just contain that? And that's all I do in the moment. Like nothing beautiful happens in my house in dysregulated moments. I just try to get through it. And then I kind of store the data and I want to act on it in the before and after when everyone's more regulated and can actually learn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becky. Really such a pleasure being with you and engaging in this really enriching talk. I know I've personally left with so many new tools and concepts and ideas of what I can bring into my own household. And I know that our teachers from our day schools and from other schools and parents in the community are really leaving with so many tools and a new set of language that they can use to enhance and improve the lives of young people in their care. Just a few quick announcements before we close, and we're also going to place these in the Zoom chat. First, I hope that you'll check out our mental health resource guide, produced in partnership with Jewish Family Service of Metro West. Importantly, if you or someone you know is in danger of harming themselves or others, please immediately contact one of the services we'll also place in this chat, or call 911 or visit your nearest emergency room. Once again, please follow Dr. Becky on Instagram to keep learning from her. And please also check out her Good Inside podcast and newsletter. Links to those resources will be available in the chat. Of course, stay tuned for more learning opportunities with Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West and the Day School Initiative, investing in affordability and excellence across our communities for Jewish day schools. And you can learn more about the Greater Metro West Day School Initiative on our website, and also follow us on Facebook. And now it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to my colleague, Rebecca Hinden, Director of the Greater Metro West Day School Initiative, who's going to close us out.
I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to Justin Rosensmollen and to Jerry Russo for organizing this evening. Thank you so much to Dr. Becky for joining us. And like I said at the beginning, if you are not a day school parent and you're interested in day school, feel free to be in touch with one of us. We'll be happy to direct you as well as share information about grants that we have available. Take care, everybody. Have a great evening. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye, everyone.